What's up, metal and heavy music fans? We've got a big one today as we are ranking the albums of Dream Theater. Alright, that's right, Dream Theater tier list, but here's the twist. This is my first time listening to all of these albums, so I'll be interested to see you in the comments in terms of how your thoughts may probably differ quite a bit from mine. But let's just dive right in with When Dream and Day Unite in 1989. This is the only album with Charlie Dominici, and I guess is sort of a transitional record from when the original project was called Majesty. I can definitely hear the differences. It does feel a little bit sort of like Rush meets the melodramatic power ballads from the likes of Journey. Not bad, but definitely kind of corny. This is also just not my vocal style, so the more instrumentally focused moments of the tracks like Itsy Jam and Light Fuse and Get Away are definitely more my speed. Even though the latter also has arguably the worst vocals of the entire album, I'm gonna put this one at D tier. Alright, but then we have Images in Words in 1992. So here we get longtime vocalist James Labria stepping in. Supposedly they auditioned like 200 people till they swooped him up from a glam metal band called Winter Rose. Definitely a fan favorite album. I can hear the shift to a darker tone, though still with some of that power ballad energy coming back on tracks like Another Day, complete with some very Kenny G sounding saxophone. Pull Me Under is definitely a classic for a reason. Excellent song. Fun fact though, this is apparently the band's only top 10 hit in their entire career. Then of course there's the epic Metropolis Part 1, The Miracle and the Sleeper. Now I have to admit, I didn't love this one on the first listen, but I actually went back to see what the fuss was about after listening to all of the other ones for more context, and now I agree that front to back, this is definitely one of their most cohesive works. To S tier you go. Alright, then we have Awake in 1994. I really dig the opening with just Portnoy's drumming and then slowly adding the other layers. And I hate to keep bringing up Rush, but this one really had me thinking about 2112 with that intro. James putting a little bit more rasp in his voice here, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. It leads to some kind of corny rock and roll sounding moments. He almost sounds like Dave Mustaine at times. But let me just clarify, James is clearly the more talented vocalist in that situation. This was also notably released right as grunge was becoming the dominant trend in music, which might have had some connection to what the label saw as subpar sales. It did hit number 32 on Billboard 200, but unfortunately I get bored with most of the first half with a lot of downtime for me, but lots of great moments in the second. The Mirror has some spooky vampire organs and a fun chug to it, which actually made me wonder if this riff inspired the Foo Fighters song All My Life. Lie also has some nice heavy riffs and a killer guitar solo. Lifting Shadows Off a Dream has an almost U2 sounding hook that sounds kind of nice with the angelic sounding synths. There are moments on this album that I actually enjoyed more than the previous one, but it's definitely less consistent overall. I'm going to put it at B tier. Alright, Falling Into Infinity, 1997. This is post Kevin Moore leaving on keys with Derek Sherinian stepping in for this and his only album. Due to the lower expected sales of the previous one, the label was really pressuring them for a more widely accessible outing, and as we well know, that rarely goes to plan. It starts off pretty strong though, with the lengthy opening of New Millennium with a very groovy head-bobbing bass line and more slowly building layers of instrumentation. Unfortunately, it kind of goes to hell after that. You Not Me is like a crappier version of a Stone Temple Pilots song. Peruvian Skies is kind of like a less interesting take on Pink Floyd. Then there are other songs so bland that they aren't even really worth mentioning. There's honestly not a single song on here that I really enjoy, save for maybe Just Let Me Breathe, which is still just okay. I actually had forgotten to add my F tier, so now that that's in place, that is where this album is going. Alright, Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory, 1999. I was thankful at least after that one, knowing that it was time for another classic. This is also where the legend, Jordan Rudess, joins the band on keys. I gotta say though, I was pretty nervous at the opening, very strong Dark Side of the Moon vibes in the intro, but not in the best kind of way. but fortunately Overture 1928 quickly kicked in and put that smile back on my face and my concerns aside. This is also a concept album, but I'm not even going to begin to try and get into all of that here. Strange Deja Vu has some truly amazing hooks with those proggy little start-stop patterns that I'm such a sucker for. I can also hear the influence that this has had on bands like Opeth and Enslaved in particular. Even some of the softer moments have more of an emotional weight behind them that cuts through the potential cheesiness that this band sometimes runs into for me. Plenty of great instrumental sections as well, thinking about the Middle Eastern sounding intro to Home or the surprise ragtime piano on The Dance of Eternity. Is it still something I enjoy all the way through and would re-listen to a lot? Not really, but this one still definitely resonates with me more, and I really enjoyed listening to it. So that one goes for S tier as well. Alright, 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, 2002. So I am not a big proponent of double albums. I can count on maybe one hand the number of them that I think have actually warranted having 2 discs. And given that some of the albums have already felt bloated, I was not particularly stoked about starting this one. But it kicks off on a pretty sick note with The Glass Prison, which in addition to being a great track at almost 14 minutes, deals with Portnoy's recovery from alcoholism. Master of Puppets and Rust in Peace were listed as influences among other things, and I can definitely hear that coming through along with just a touch of Faith No More. I definitely was not expecting that record scratching part though, which I'm pretty sure is the only time in this entire discography that I ran into that. In the other direction, I hear the influence of this album coming through on Colors 2 for Between the Buried and Me. Blind Faith has some mild Tool vibes mixed with some Alice in Chains, which were also reported influences. Honestly, I was shocked with how much I liked this. I still think that they could have trimmed it down quite a bit and it would have been tighter and more solid as a result. The first disc is also definitely better than the second in my opinion. Comparatively, within the context of all the other albums though, I'm gonna put it at C tier. Definitely award for worst cover art though. Alright, Train of Thoughts, 2003. Here, Dream Theater set out to make their heaviest album to date according to Portnoy, and whew, did that idea go so wrong. As I Am is a weak opener, the instrumentation is fine, but the vocal lines are just terrible, both in choice of melody and the kind of Dr. Seuss rhyming scheme. This is actually an issue on multiple songs for some reason. The Dying Soul even has a cringy sort of rapping section to it, and The Sacrifice reminds me a lot of the bad 2000s radio butt rock out there, and when it's not lame, it's just boring. The last 2 tracks are kind of okay, but ultimately I'm gonna put this one at D tier. Octavarium, 2005. This album cover is the one I most associate with Dream Theater for whatever reason. It did manage to hit high on the charts in several countries and was largely praised by critics. Right from the start, it's a clear improvement from the last album for sure. I guess each song is in a different key too, which is where the title comes from. Personal favorites here, These Walls, Never Enough, even if at times it sounds like it's almost ripping off Muse's Hysteria, which had just come out 2 years prior, let me put out there. And definitely, of course, Panic Attack, which is another song I've heard previously thanks to Rock Band 2, and honestly, I wish all of their songs were more like this one. This is heavy Dream Theater done right. Kind of a mixed bag overall though, I would say, as a full listen. Some really great songs and some forgettable ones. I'm gonna ultimately put this one at A tier, and it's one of those albums that kind of gets extra points for being a legacy one. Systematic Chaos, 2007, and hey, it's been a while since I referenced Rush, but again with this opening for The Presence of Enemies, need I say more? Great track, by the way, awesome songwriting, lots of great ups and downs, very dynamic, very engaging, even when there aren't any vocals. In fact, I'd say more so even for my personal taste. Speaking of which, a lot of this album is just the right flavor for me. Lots of fun technical proggy parts like on Constant Motion and The Dark Eternal Night. Rhythm Magazine actually voted it one of the best drumming albums of all time. The vocals are kind of sucky though when they do come up. Lots of bad sort of Hetfield impressions and just overall inconsistent, but even so, I really enjoyed this one for a lot of the great instrumentation, and I'd say it's one of the few that I actually really wanted to go back and re-listen to. I'm gonna put it at B tier. Black Clouds and Silver Linings, 2009. This is Portnoy's final album, sadly. Lyrics mostly centered around difficult moments they've faced in their lifetimes. Cool, dramatic opening on A Nightmare to Remember with the chorals and organ. All around solid song. The Shattered Fortress feels a little bit like a continuation from the previous album, but lots of dull portions too, unfortunately. And I don't care who this pisses off, but Wither sucks. That song is garbage. It's like when you're watching the movie about the guy and the girl that everyone wants to be together, and then the thing happens where they break up and there's the montage of them missing each other. This is the song that plays in the background. Some great moments, but just not super memorable as a whole. I'm going to split the difference with a C. All right, and then a dramatic turn of events in 2011. On the Backs of Angels continues the trend of really great openers with more choral and atmospheric elements transitioning into some really excellent key parts. And speaking of which, Rudess across the board really killing it on this track. Him and Petrucci's interplay on Lost Not Forgotten is pretty incredible as well. By the way, little aside, you should check out Rudess's contribution to the last Torrential Downpour EP if you'd like to hear his style mixed with some sort of Dillinger Escape Plan vibes. Anyways, Build Me Up, Break Me Down has some really heavy guitar hooks. Bridges in the Sky got my head banging. I saw some people ranking this one lower, but it was another one that I enjoyed almost start to finish, and it has a lot of strong writing and performances, even if it's a little inconsistent, especially in the second half, but I'm going to put it also at B tier, but kind of at the higher end. Alright, self-titled Dream Theater 2013, another cool symphonic intro, although at this point it's not quite as special to hear it. The Enemy Inside is a really tight banger of a track with a wicked conclusion. Enigma Machine may be one of their best instrumentals to date. Surrender to Reason has some great synth parts and a great kind of dueling bass and guitar part in the second half that I just loved to death. I'd say the first half is slightly better than the second, but thanks to the shorter track lengths, no song really overstays its welcome. And then on the flip side, the 20+ minute closer Illumination Theory is quite awe-inspiring, honestly. Another increasingly consistent runtime. I would say that this is among their best as a complete work, I think. Even if song for song it doesn't have some of the classic tracks, I think just as a whole, it deserves to be at A tier and high at that. Alright, the Astonishing 2016. Oh boy, another double album, but this one even longer than the last one with 34 songs and over 2 hours long. But lots of good stuff here. The intro to this one goes full on Mr. Crowley, which honestly this whole album just sounds massive in general, like Queen's A Night at the Opera. We even get some bagpipes. But even with all that great instrumentation, I feel like James feels like the star of the show here, maybe more than ever before or perhaps afterwards. And he really sounds fantastic here, even if that's my least favorite aspect of this band. Lord Nefarious has a cool vibe. 3 Days has kind of a fun Between the Buried and Me coma ecliptic energy to it with the ragtime piano and evil jazz man delivery. A Life Left Behind has that great piano part too. It definitely gets cheesy and a little up its ass in its grandiosity at times, but on the other hand, it flows pretty well and is less boring at least than some of the other albums up to this point. The diversity of styles and shorter songs again keeps things interesting. It would make for a great Broadway musical, and it's inarguably impressive, but man, as an album, this thing is very long. To its credit, I wouldn't call it a slog, but it certainly is a deterrent when it comes to thinking about repeat listens. I know it's conceptual, but from a pure musical standpoint, I would probably axe almost the entire second disc, since it has more of the slower parts that I personally kind of find boring, but overall, I'm still going to rank this one pretty well and give it a B. Alright, Distance Over Time 2019. So hey, only an hour after that. They must have been tired after that previous album. Joking aside though, I was thankful for that. Less is often more. But this is kind of another mixed bag of an album with really solid heavy moments, but also a lot of forgettable ones. Paralyzed has a bit of a Tool vibe at times that I really enjoyed. Room 137 has a super crunchy groove. S2N has a really great bass hook. At Wit's End and Pale Blue Dot stand out as well with those raging guitar riffs, just not the most memorable in the end, and I'd say I gotta split the difference here. I'm going to put it at C tier, but in the upper end. And again, as always, these are ranked from right to left within their tiers as well, so the closer to the letter, the higher they go. Alright, and then A View from the Top of the World in 2021. So now we get to the album that made me decide to finally take this journey to begin with. And I have to say, despite my initial kind of disinterested stance, I am really impressed with this thing. Every track has something to offer, from the almost melodic death metal riffs and panic attack-ish pace changes of Answering the Call, to the killer synth organ and piano of Sleeping Giant, to the absolute banger intro and infectious grooves of Awaken the Master. And then another 20-minute epic closer that scarcely wastes even a second of its runtime. I wouldn't call it perfect, and you can check out my full review for extended thoughts, but all in all, I think that this is one of their most consistent and impressive albums to date, and so I'm going to put it at the upper end of A tier. But now it's your turn. Let me know down in the comments, how would you rank these Dream Theater albums? Where do we agree? Where do we disagree? Let's just have a fun conversation, not get angry. And then stick around. I got a full playlist of these tier lists that you can check out, and then album reviews and plenty of other stuff. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.